If you've been watching Lightwave videotapes, get ready for the next wave.
My name's Lee Stranahan. This is my brother Ken.
The LENY CD-ROM is a 2-hour interactive video tutorial featuring Lee and Ken Stranahan. You'll learn the secrets of today's top Lightwave effects artists as they reveal the techniques used to make the coolest movies and TV shows. This 2-disc CD set isn't a bunch of rehashed material from the internet. It features all new tutorials not available anywhere else. An interactive video index and online Lightwave help leave ordinary videotapes in the dust. Additional tutorials from Andy Freer, King of Dynamic Realities, and PJ Foley of Foundation Imaging cover both Particle Storm and Fiber Factory. If you're serious about Lightwave, you'll love the LENY CD-ROM.
Welcome to Lightwave Advanced Character Animation. First thing I want to talk about is character setups. Possibly the worst thing you can do is spend a lot of time modeling a very complex T-Rex or mech warrior or whatever you want, and then start throwing in bones and trying to figure out how to join it, and then start trying to animate a sequence. Worst thing you want to do. The first thing you want to do instead is think about your character setups. We're talking about animation here. We're not talking about eye candy. So you just want to have a simple character layout, a setup, an articulated skeleton that you can animate as rapidly as possible to learn the motion, to get the motion down. One way you can save a lot of time and effort is for each of your characters set up a default scene. You'll either be animating the little monster yourself, in which case you just get mad at yourself, or you're going to be doing the setup for another animator and they're going to be down on you if the character is difficult to deal with. Either way, it's in your best interest to make the setup as animator friendly as possible. A default scene is one that stores all the characters, objects, and other data ready to go. This is especially important on long projects with lots of shots, group projects where you've got more than one animator handling a character, or where you've got several animators handling different characters. Anytime you've got a scene where you bring the characters together, you have to have everything set up so it's as easy as possible for people to work together. Default scene contains a character with all the associated hierarchies, bones, motion, plugins, lights, whatever, all set up and ready to go. A good rule of thumb for setting up a default scene is, would you as an animator have to set up anything else before starting to animate? If you have to set up something else, put it in there, save it in the default scene. Okay, here's a typical start for a default scene. For a number of technical reasons, mostly dealing with bones deformation, things like that, you generally want to lay out a character in this pose. That's not how you want to start to animate, because you almost never start with a character lying flat on the back, spread-eagled on the ground. Unless the lead animator tells you otherwise, you want to pose the character in a typical default posture. The animator should not have to stand the character up, move the arms, whatever, before they can start getting to the action of the scene. They want to be able to start right away from a better default posture. This is getting there, he's standing upright, you're partway there, but how many scenes do you animate where the person has their arms out like this? Again, not too many. This is better. For dramatic reasons, anyone here have any acting experience? Or know anyone who has? Okay, you know about keeping your hands at waist or above. You drop the hands, all of a sudden the person looks dejected, or there's less energy in the character. You want the character to have energy. If they're going to attract the audience's eye and hold it, keep the hands above the waist. This just saves time if it loads in by the default. You don't have to go that much farther to get it right into your action. The next thing is, once you've got the default pose, animators can work faster and more efficiently if you can get a clear picture of the part they're posing without having to tweak a view every time. Since Lightwave lets you use lights for views, simply add a set of inactive lights assigned to the various bones or objects that require close-up views. Anytime you use load from scene to import the character, you can import all the view lights at the same time. Okay, full face. These are just some typical views that I like to use with the default setup. And these are all just inactive lights. Now, I like to center a view for the feet on the toes, because that's where you're usually trying to tweak the exact placement. That's just a personal thing. For the hands, I like going for the middle of the palm, because you're usually tweaking the posing of the hands around grasping an object or making contact with something, so a view of the palm is usually easiest. Okay, here's a shot showing Most of the lights except the front view and side view, which are slightly out of frame. If you've got a character with some special features, a tail, any like mobile ears or something like that on some kind of a monster, you might also want to have shots of the back of the head or more detailed rear view. If you're doing a creature like a dragon or whatever, you're going to have a whole bunch of lights at just about every extremity joint so you can get things in more detail. A couple of considerations. If you're going to be using OpenGL, because OpenGL starts off with the light at the top of the list, you want to set up your OpenGL lights first. Most people work in one, but if you want to do 3-point lighting with the OpenGL lights, put those in your default scene first, then add on the view lights so they're not messing with your OpenGL setup. Even if they're inactive, they'll take the place of your OpenGL lights, so make sure they're further down the order. Setting up this many lights in a default scene means you're really going to have to plan ahead about how you want to light the character. So plan that before you even start laying out the character, or just plan on having to go back and rebuild your default scene if you mess up the lighting the first time. Once you start setting active lights for the scene, after you've got your default scene and you've brought it in, you should change the character's OpenGL light to the main key light in the scene. If you set up the main light for your scene, get it just the way you want, make a note of the settings. When you bring the character in, reset that number 1 light, your first OpenGL light, to the main light for the scene. It'll make the lighting in your OpenGL views look that much more like the final lighting for the scene. I'm going to give you a better view of what the light and default setup is like. The preview playback. These previews were captured on 5.0. I'm not sure what the scrolling black bar comes from, but you can see views for the hands, feet, sides in front of the head, and then further away, total front view of the body and a total side view of the body. You might want to add more view lights if you're going to have characters interacting where they might block the view from some of these lights, but again, that's on an as-needed basis. It's not really necessary for your default scene. About setting up the lights, someone asked how these were parented. The lights are set parented to nulls, and the nulls are assigned to the bones throughout the character. For a more complex character, and this was just a default just to show the lights, it's not actually completely boned up the way I'd want to animate this character. I prefer using lock and key. If you have that plug-in already, it makes assigning the lights and moving them around, getting just the right view, much easier, saves you a lot of effort on the setups. Once you've got the setup, once you've got the pose, the lights, the last thing you want to do on it, and this is something that even if you're working solo, write it up. If you're doing a solo project especially, you're going to go nuts with this little monster because it takes so much time, and it's very easy when you've been moving back and forth between default scenes, working with various aspects of the production, to forget exactly how a setup worked. All you have to do is basically a contact sheet like this that has the basic views, and just write across it, handwrite notes about how the lights are set up, how the pose is set up, limits on joints, just circle the joint, write some notes and whatever. Any kind of a roadmap that you can use yourself, or more importantly, you can hand to someone else in a production environment to document that figure as quickly as possible. This may seem a little bit drastic, but when you start animating, this is going to become carved in your forehead. Anything, excess numbers of bones, an excess number of polygons, textures, anything at all that slows down your work to actually pose, get the timing, being able to scrub, and get the action down right, get the animation down right, is going to be a death knell on the job. If it slows you down, throw it out. You can always put it back in later. What I'm saying is, when you're starting off with to do the basic setup, make sure you've got a very low-res setup for faster feedback. What I recommend to people actually is to, if they need to practice, if they need to learn the timing of being a character animator, work with just object hierarchies. Forget bones, forget metaform, forget all the complicated stuff that slows down the feedback. Just work with parented object hierarchies because it's the fastest feedback. If anybody here has seen stick figure theater, you don't need anything complex to communicate humor to have a convincing character. Work with the basics first. This is a bit of wisdom that Chuck Jones is fond of throwing at people. I don't think he came up with it originally. I've heard it from several other sources. In traditional drawing character animation, he's fond of saying, everybody has 100,000 bad drawings in them. The sooner you get them out of your system, the better. I'd like to extend that to 3D and say, everybody has 100,000 bad keyframes inside them. Bad poses, the action isn't quite right, the timing isn't there. The sooner you get them out of your system, the better. Now, it doesn't matter how detailed the character is, you just need to get those keyframes out fast, get the practice, learn, develop your personal judgment, your sense of timing. That's why these faster setups, the simpler setups, give you the faster feedback. You can spend more time doing it. If you work the numbers on this, you'll find out that if you wanted to become a good character animator, get all these bad keyframes out of your system in 1 year, you'd have to set about 1 keyframe a minute. I don't know too many professional animators who can do an entire character setup for 1 keyframe, go on to the next one in 1 minute. So you're actually looking at several years of consistent time spent doing this before you can even approach 100,000 keyframes. I'm not talking rendered frames either. I'm talking actual keyframes. So plan on spending a lot of work. This is tough, and there is no way to automate the personal judgment, the experience in getting a pose to read properly, getting the timing to be just right. That's only something that comes with experience. An example of a very simple character to work with is this little item. It's the basic artist mannequin. It works exactly as you'd imagine. Each one of the round joints, rotates and poses. This thing is so fast to set up and so quick to update that you can scrub this on any machine. This will cover just about everything except realistic spinal deformation. He's just got the one waist joint. Can't really shrug his shoulders without coming apart, and he doesn't have toes or fingers, so you can't do a real heel and toe walk. But just about everything else, basic walk cycles and things, you can do with this character. It's very good for practice. There's the puppet character with the default setup again, default pose, hand just above the waist, standing. It was originally laid out, spread-eagled, flat in his back. From this point, you can load this up and just start animating, start changing your poses. There are a couple of, I wish I could refresh this. There are a couple of nulls, one at the center of gravity, the CG of the character, and one at basically ground level, so that you can get them to tumble by just treating the difference between the ground null and the CG null as basically a puppet support rod. Anybody here have done any stop motion animation? Any traditional animators? Great, then you know what I'm talking about. One of the other things about the book is I try to come from the point of view of the character animator working in the computer and the traditional stop-mo, both in clay, puppets, whatever, and drawn. So I try to introduce these terms. Your support rods, your tie-downs, they all have equivalents in CG, and I try to discuss those. You've got a support rod basically for this puppet that controls the height, and you've got a null on the ground that controls exactly where it is, essentially your tie-down for the puppet. So you animate those two and then just pose the hierarchy, and that covers everything you need to do. This simple character can be very expressive in the right hands, and it's still very easy for the beginner to pose and to update. Next topic is forward and inverse kinematics, covered by popular demand. Basically, until the earlier demo of the new features in 5.5, I tended to tell people to stay away from IK, because the 5.0 IK, while it is useful for some applications, there's a pretty serious problem with it. Flailing. Even with a very constrained, very restricted set of motions, basically the only axes available for the thigh, knee, and ankle are pitch, you can still get problems where there is an ambiguous position of the goal object, and the character will flail before finding it. If you're trying to fine-tune and get one of those keyframes set, this is very frustrating and time-wasting to work with. So just from a productivity standpoint, it's faster if you know what you're doing to use forward kinematics almost exclusively. With some of the new improvements to IK, maybe that has changed. I haven't had a chance to really evaluate 5.5. From what I saw today, I think it is going to change my attitude towards IK. Now, there are some solutions where IK is appropriate, mostly involving the eyes and eyelids, just to automate eye tracking. I strongly recommend people to apply IK, full-time IK, to the eyes and eyelids. There's a big section in my book on exactly how to set up the eyelids with constraints so that they pretty much follow the irises automatically, and all you have to do is move the gaze object around and the eyes will look at it. We've got an eye target. We've got nulls in front of each eye, tracking the goal object. We've got separate eyelid objects. This is obviously a different head I've added to the puppet. This is the next level of complexity. The first artist mannequin, it was just the head was a lump. Now, if you want to start getting a little bit of expression and start working with eye gaze tracking, that sort of thing, you add a slightly more complex head, and you add eyes that are articulated, upper eyelids that are articulated. The lower eyelids are still part of the head. Until you get into really detailed, really realistic character animation, you can just leave the lower eyelids alone. Don't bother animating them. What I've set up here is, I'm not sure if you can see it. Okay, there's the setup. Head, eye null, eyelids also parented to the head. Basically, the eyelids are set up exactly like the eyeballs to track, with the default rest position basically being the normal attitude of the eyelid if the eyeball was looking straight ahead, set up to track the same target, the same goal object as the eyeball, simply constrained so it can't move any further than a certain amount. With that set up and with the eyelids constrained to simply the pitch axis, it's absolutely automatic. You can move the goal object wherever you want. The eyelids and eye will move automatically. You don't have to think about it anymore. And again, speed. In a production environment, if all you have to do is point out where you want the thing to be looking, you're in business. One other place where IK can work is if you have a long serpentine object, a snake or other fluid object, or a pair of human lips, where you want smooth deformation, but putting in all the control points is prohibitive in terms of your time. If you've got 25 control points around a mouth to tweak and get the proper mouth shape, you're in real trouble if you've got to pose them all. Okay, one way to get around that is you can have pairs of bones, starting off from the parent bone that is moved around, two bones, and then a goal null at the end. So you move each one of these change of 4 bones. The center of the 4 can be moved to control that part of the lip above it. The ends are directed at these nulls. It's a little clearer if I get rid of the mouth behind it. See, there's a lot of bones there, and instead of having to adjust each one of them, you only have to adjust the nulls and about 1/4 of the bones to get the pretty much complete range of motion possible with this particular model. This is just running through, I knocked off a set of about 11 morph targets that were created with the bone setup you just saw. It's not perfect, it's a real quick job, but this would be a starting point for putting together a lip sync motion library. Or if you want to continue animating with bones, that setup for bones allows you to move, let's see, it's middle upper null, lower middle null, the corner nulls, and 4 bones in the midpoint of upper and lower lips. So you've got 8 control points to cover pretty much the range of motion of this mouth. The next thing I'm going to cover is we've got the basic setup pretty much defined to the humanoid skeletal structure, and we've thrown in some eyes and put full-time IK in. We've talked a little bit about doing the face, but we're going to skip over that for a bit. One of the first things you're probably going to practice on, one of the things you first should practice on, is what's called in the industry transportation animation. Walk cycles, run cycles, just moving the character around. Not a whole lot of dramatic interpretation there, but just getting the basic motions down. Also, it's a lot easier because if you're doing a cycle, you can repeat it, you can just keep watching and it's looping, and you can analyze it much more easily. So it's a very good thing for beginners to start with. The big problem with doing transportation animation in Lightwave using forward kinematics and keyframing is foot slippage. Moonwalking, skating, getting the foot to stay where it's supposed to on the surface, whether you've got an irregular surface or a flat floor. If you keyframe it, you're just going to have to set a keyframe for just about every keyframe, because every time you pose the character, the relationship between the CG, between the support rod for the puppet, and the foot placement on the ground is going to change slightly. That's just the way it is. So you have to reposition that support rod to keep the foot where it's supposed to be. We don't really have an equivalent of tie downs for the feet themselves. Give you an example of what that ends up looking like. Keyframe on just about every frame. This gets to be a real pain. To get around that, you can use a plugin called Lock and Key. It's distributed by Dynamic Realities. I'm not sure the exact price on it, but what it allows you to do is set up basically a tie down from stop motion, a tie down for the feet that can be changed on the fly. You can have the left foot tied down to something for 15 frames, then go to have the other foot tied down for another 15 frames, do it on the fly. So instead of this, where if you look at the numbers, you've got 125 keyframes out of 159, and this is just a standard walk cycle. You can see all the keyframes. This is after I got the poses exactly the way I wanted, had the character walking in place, looks good, the timing is all. It's a very basic, plain vanilla walk. Once I got all the poses the way I wanted, I had to get his feet to match on the ground. And if you watch the feet once they plant, watch the foot. Even with all these keyframes, there's still a little bit of sliding. Keyframe every frame, and it still slides a little bit just because of rounding errors built into Lightwave. So even if you do keyframe every frame, you're still going to get some slip. There is no absolute cure for it. On the other hand, if you use lock and key, much fewer keyframes, and look at the foot. Look at the feet. Absolutely rock solid. And again, these are the same poses. The only thing I did was I dropped the support rod nulls and just use lock and key on the feet instead. They call it lock and key because the lock is the null that you set that you want the key, the object, drawn to, and you set a combination. You say, okay, the lock is this point on the ground, the key is the ankle, the combo is, okay, ground to ankle for these 15 frames, and lock and key moves the entire figure to make that match. There's a proviso, and I'm going to go into that a little more detail later. One of the rules of thumb in traditional animation is if you're doing a motion cycle, you don't repeat it any more than 3 times without putting some kind of a little jog or misstep or hesitation or change in the timing to break it up. Because when it's on the screen, especially if you've got a panning backdrop and the character's holding position in the camera's eye, after the 3rd cycle it becomes obvious that it's a cycle. But if you've got 3 steps and then a little bump or hop where he stubs his toe or whatever, and then recovers and does another 3 standard steps, you're in good shape. The catch to that is you have to turn off repeat. You can't just pose one motion cycle and have it repeat forever. You have to go in there and duplicate all the keyframes. Okay, here's one of the screens from Lock and Key. Basically this says for the keyframe range from 1 to 16, we're going to lock the measuring null. That's the null that I had on the ground. I usually throw a spare null into the default scenes just to measure from point to point using the numeric readout. That's the lock. We're using the offset. That means the root of this puppet's hierarchy is the CG null, the center of gravity for the whole thing. I'm saying, okay, the puppet is what we're going to be applying lock and key to, but I want to offset from the center of the hierarchy, from the root of the hierarchy, all the way out to the left foot. And that's part of the lock and key's offset functions. You can set the offset to anywhere in the hierarchy. I could have the key set to the knee, the hip, anything I wanted anywhere within that hierarchy, right out to the ends. For a walk cycle going from frame 0 to 66, you can see we're doing right foot, left foot, left foot. Very simple. I don't have to change anything else because I've got that measuring null set up as the lock, and the lock just moves from place to place depending on which foot you're locking down. And it's just a matter of changing the key at the appropriate keyframes. So the measuring null has keyframes at 17, 34, 50, 66. And just a matter of which foot locks to the null at that point. Next step up, timing. Sort of paraphrase Mark Twain on this one. You cannot get too much practice on setting timing. That's what this job is all about. Stick figure theater, the Matchlight commercials with the dancing match, the Levi's commercials where you've got the figures coming off the restroom door signs. None of those characters had faces, none of those characters had, fingers and toes. The only thing they had to express was just the basic schematic human figure. And the timing is what told the story and made you identify with the character, made you laugh, made you think a little bit. But it's definitely got your attention because it looked like it was alive. That's the illusion of life you're going for, and the only way you get that illusion of life is timing. So that's the point of all the easy, fast feedback setups, is so you can work on and practice your timing. Timing makes or breaks your character animation. An animated character's actions are only outlined by its key poses. The rest of the action, you set your key poses every 6 frames or whatever. The rest of the action is all based on the in-betweens. Lightwave does the in-betweens for you. That's the big advantage you have over drawn animation or stop motion or puppeteering, is the computer does a big chunk of the work for you. However, the computer is stupid. The computer has no idea how people move. It does not know how to interpolate properly. If you give it its head it will just interpret things smoothly, and you'll end up with underwater motion. We've all seen examples of bad CG. Everything moves slow, mushy, like it's underwater. That's because the computer was given too much control. You need to fix that by applying basic principles of traditional character animation. These are the same principles that John Lasseter talked about in his 1987 paper, SIGGRAPH. Lasseter is a Disney-trained traditional animator first, a computer animator second. He's been espousing the same thing since he wanted to do Brave Little Toaster as a CG piece. If you can find the paper, dig it up. It's the 1987 SIGGRAPH Proceedings, Computer Graphics. I think it's volume 41. I forget the exact citation. It's mentioned in the bibliography of my book, another plug. It's worth picking up because he analyzes Andre and Wally B. He analyzes Luxo Jr. right down to the action of the power chord. It's the absolute basic work in this field. Consult it. A lot of what I'm doing, the rest of this is just based on his work. Okay, you have to apply a handful of principles to get the right timing. Ease, snap, anticipation, follow through, and overlap. I don't know how many demo reels I've seen that showed none of these. If your demo reel shows every one of these, that you know these principles and you know how to apply it, you will be hired. And starting salaries as a character animator are 6 figures and up. According to Fortune magazine, I don't know, these numbers really made me laugh. They said there were like 17,000 graduates from character animation programs in the country, and there are 34,000 openings. I don't think there are 34,000 openings in the world, but that's what Fortune prints. So. The demand is really outstripping the supply. The lead animators who have to look at demo reels, who have to hire people, are going out there raiding schoolyards, hiring 17-year-olds out of high school, putting them to work at $100,000 a year. It's insane. If you're willing to put in the time and practice, you can get into it. That's a lot of practice. Okay, first things, ease and snap. Objects in the real world can't abruptly change from standing still to moving fast. Any object that has mass needs time to get up to speed. The more mass, the longer the acceleration. Basics physics. The same goes for slowing down, changing direction, distorting the object's shape. It's all inertia. In animation, a gradual change that leads into an action is an ease in, and coming out of an action is an ease out. I just lump them together, call them ease. The quickest way to understand ease and how to apply it is to study and experiment with Lightwave's motion graphs. Let me pull one of these up. Getting from point A to point B. The top one just gets there. No interpolation whatsoever, just boom. It's there over the entire range of the frames. You just set one keyframe, the second keyframe, and the computer just does the straight line bit. That doesn't look natural at all. It just stop. The second one shows some ease. The lower part of the curve shows you're accelerating from a standing start, getting up to speed, just 2 additional keyframes, and you get a nice lazy integral sign like this. Nice smooth ease. Okay, that's good as far as it works. You just added ease. You've shown that you know one concept. However, this is what looks like underwater motion. The computer puts in this ease automatically. It overdoes it. It slows into an action, it slows out of an action, and puts your audience to sleep. So that's pretty mushy. And there's a shorter version of saying, you know, this is mush. That's just pure ease. There's no snap to counteract it. You need to balance snap and ease. Let's pull up snap. Okay, this is snap. Especially in cartoon animation and caricatured animation, this is exaggerated, but it's true for realistic animation as well. When you go to pick something up, you don't get up to the maximum speed and then slow down and come to a perfect stop just as you reach it. You go as fast as you can for probably 90% of the travel, and slow down only when you're just about there to avoid breaking your knuckles on something. That's snap. That's lively movement. You're moving very fast during most of the motion. And that's what setting the keyframes tight like this, we're getting 90% of the motion done in the space of 2-3 frames. Now you can make this very, very extreme, especially for cartoon characters. In fact, for cartoon characters, I don't know if there's such a thing as too extreme. You can get snap across a single frame and it'll actually work. At this point, I'd like to point out about character animation. One of the best tools you can invest in for developing your sense of timing and for applying these principles is a Laserdisc player with a digital freeze frame. And get the old Warner and Fleischers and Disney and whatever, and single frame and study the timing. In fact, one of the advantages the Lightwave has for doing this sort of study is if you can digitize that and bring in find the timing that you really like. If you're really into Tex Avery, you like the style, you want to duplicate it, get a videotape or Laserdisc of Tex Avery's stuff, Find the sequences that you really like best, digitize those. This isn't a violation of copyright if you use it for your own personal study. Just don't hand it out to anybody else. Bring those frames up in the backdrop, in the background for Lightwave, and put nulls at all the joints. Don't try to build an armature that'll fit because there's too much squash and stretch, it won't work. But put a null at the elbow, at the wrist, at the fingertip, at each of the eyes, at the jaw, and go through and do several hundred frames, setting the keyframes at each frame. Now this isn't going to be useful for applying to a hierarchy, but when you've got it all done and it's an exact match with the action and you like it, you open up the motion graph like this for each one of those nulls, and you see the shape of the timing that Tex Avery used. Rotoscoping as a learning tool. You can learn from people who are dead but who are masters of their craft, and you can do it in Lightwave better than you can by simply watching in single framing and staring at the TV until your eyes bleed. And you get it in absolute numbers. You just get a string of keyframes that shows exactly what their timing was like. We've got a motion graph for a basic amount of snap here. You've got a balance here between ease down here. Ease goes up to snap, covers most of the action, and then you've got ease out up here. That's still going to be a little bit mushy. You don't necessarily want to have a lot of ease out. Ease in is good because you're accelerating, but especially cartoon characters, they tend to come to a stop very quickly. So you want to reduce the ease out. That gets into, actually, real quick test, and again, this is something from the book. The upper ball was done with the straight ease interpolation, just the 4 keyframes, just doing straight ease. The lower one is has the motion graph that you see behind it, where that middle part has some snap. So you can see motion blur takes care of a lot of things. I like to say motion blur forgives a multitude of sins. You can get away with very snappy motion, with very jerky motion even, as long as you have the motion blur turned up, it's going to look just fine. But look at the end of this. When the lower ball gets to the end, it's slowing down and it's looking just as computery, just as floaty as the upper ball. It's slowing down too much. It really ought to snap to the end and then not ease out quite so much. That's the basics on ease and snap. The next step is anticipation and follow-through. We're going to see how to tweak this to make it a little bit more realistic. Anticipation. Warming up, building a little groundwork, preparing your audience and preparing your character for the larger action to follow. You don't just start off from a standing start and go zip off in one direction. You have to back up first and anticipate and then go through. Easy way to do anticipation in Lightwave is if you're starting your action from this point, excuse me a second, if you're starting your action from this level, and what you can do is, wait a minute, hold on just a second. You can find approximate values for an anticipation by moving to the symmetrical frame on the other side of the motion's origin. You're starting off at this point, you know that at this point you're going to be passing through a certain value. Okay, split the difference and drop it back a little bit from the direction you're going. That gives you your anticipation. Very easy. It's just a starting point. You can tweak this and move the values around, but that's an easy way to get a first stab at it. I like to work with units of 4 or 5, at most 6 frames. There are several rules of thumb from traditional animation that apply. If you're doing overlapping action, if you're doing anticipation, anything less than 4 frames, your audience isn't going to read it. So if you try to get that, that's one where you can't exaggerate too much if you make the anticipation too quick, too snappy. The anticipation you can draw out. You know, we've all seen the slow motion wind-ups, and especially the Bugs Bunny animation with the ball players. That slow motion wind-up was great. You can have that anticipation just go on forever. It's a wonderful joke. If he did a 3-frame wind-up and fire like a cannon, most of the motion would be lost. It's just too fast. 4, 5, 6 frames is about the minimum. Follow-through is animation just on the other end of is the same as anticipation just on the other end of the action. This is the whole package. We've got anticipation, here, ease in, we've got a nice solid snap. Okay, now up here, you notice there's almost no ease out at all. It comes to a very sharp stop. If I zoomed in on this, you see that there actually is a little bit of an ease out to a follow through on this action. then it just sort of holds steady. One thing in here, this is what's called a moving hold. You can get away with an absolutely rigid hold in 2D animation. The character just holds stock still because people's expectations of drawn animation are lower. They've already willingly suspended a lot of their disbelief in terms of the realism presented on the screen. If you're doing 3D, this is true for traditional puppet and clay animation as well as for computer stuff, but even more so for computer stuff, you've got a very heightened level of expectations of reality. Your audience expects things to look photorealistic. Even if there are stylistic things like Toy Story where it's a little bit suspended, the motion has to be very realistic. If you have a 3D CG character holding absolutely stock still, they're dead. They're a mannequin. They're a dummy. There's no life. Even for 2 or 3 frames, it just died. You have to keep them moving. One of the easiest ways to do that, other than pose, tweaking the pose, is to make 2 poses for the moving hold, however long it's going to be. One just slightly different, the motion angle is just a little bit different, and alternate between them every 4th, 5th, 6th frame, but break up that pattern. Don't do it every 4th frame. It's A, B, because that just looks like a cycle and people pick it out. But you can have your character holding almost perfectly still, a little bit of breathing, a little bit of jitter in the joints, just something. Blinks are great too. Blink, a little bit of a facial tick, anything to show that they're still alive. Just don't have them freeze solid. That works in 2D, it doesn't work now. So this little bit of a dip up here is just a moving hold for this character, just a little bit of a change in the position to show that they're not completely dead. Then we've got this little hump is an anticipation before the following action. We've got an ease in. We've got snap. There's a little bit of curvature, but it's pretty much flat. You're going across about 3 frames there to cover 90% of the distance. We've got an ease out here because we're trying to slow the motion, make it a little bit easier there. And then follow through and coming back to rest position. This action simply describes a character bringing their hand down forcefully onto a table, bringing it back up and preparing for the next blow, like if they were hammering nails. Very simple action, but you show in this motion graph anticipation, ease, snap, follow through, and repeat the cycle again. 2 different treatments, 1 action. You have something like this on your reel, they're going to know what to look for, they're going to know what they're looking at, and you've got a shot at the job. Looking at a professional's motion graphs, if you can ever talk one into showing them, is also getting a very good eye into the way they work. This is something, if people ask me questions about character animation, if they're having a particular problem, send me an AVI, sure, I'll look at it, but if you can take a screenshot of the motion graphs on the action, I can tell you a lot more from that. I can just highlight, okay, you need more snap here, you need a little more follow through here. The motion graphs are the best analytical tool possible for learning how to do timing. The only motion in this is the shoulder joint. The motion graph that you saw was just for the shoulder joint, just for that 1 action. Now normally there would be overlapping action. The forearm, you'd have a whole wind-up going through the entire body right down to the CG, changing the stance on the feet, really getting in a dynamic line of action. I posed this real quick just to get 1 clean motion graph for the demonstration. So the only action you're looking for is right here at the shoulder joint. And I've got several dead frames there in the loop. But you can see you've got 2 different kinds of timing there. You've got the short, sharp, coming down, obviously making an impact on a table or whatever surface is there. And then you've got the much easier when it comes back up. There isn't anything stopping it. There's a little bit of follow through and carry over, then coming back to the rest position and holding. Okay, that pretty much wraps up timing. 3 words to live by. You cannot get too much practice. Practice, practice, practice. Even the basics, doing walk cycles. Anytime you create a character, anytime someone sends you a character, or you can get a hold of a character, the characters that are included with most packages, first thing you do, set up a default scene, set up a walk cycle, just to develop your timing. Transportation animation is probably the easiest thing to do. It's also the least important, and it's the stuff that the lead animators will detail off to the junior animators. Practice, practice, practice. One of the tests I've heard of lead animators pulling on new hires or potential new hires is to sit them down and say, okay, here's a character, do a walk cycle. And you've got to do it right then live while this lead animator is over your shoulder. It's put up or shut up time. If you've been doing nothing but walk cycles, well, the rest of your stuff isn't going to look too great, but you're going to be able to knock out a walk cycle pretty easily. And even when you're up to more advanced levels and you're doing really strong, character animation with lots of emotion and strong poses and things, go back a couple times a month and just do another walk or a run cycle on a basic character just to stay in practice on it. It's a good put up or shut up. Yeah, I can do a walk.
When do you use these and snap and anticipation?
All those principles apply to every motion, every time, no exceptions.
Including walking?
It's only a matter of degree. That's where the sense, where the judgment, where the professional experience comes in, of knowing exactly how much anticipation for a particular action. The Bugs Bunny, baseball windup, that anticipation goes on forever, but it works in that particular situation. It's part of the humor. That much anticipation for a simple exit stage left would not have worked because the timing is so bad. This is a lot like stand-up comedy, a lot like acting. How many here have any experience or taking class or whatever on some kind of acting or movement or dance, anything at all? Okay, great. Keep it up. The rest of you get involved in something, whether it's a martial art, taking dance class, I don't care if it's ballroom, ballet, whatever. Something that gets you more in tune with your body and the way it moves and develops your sense of timing. One of the Disney animators I talked to highly recommends improv, but he's a bit of an extrovert. I'm not quite up to that. I do a little fencing and martial arts myself, and it does help with body awareness. Developing the sense of timing is absolutely crucial, and if it's a difficult action that you don't really have any motion reference, you don't have any videotapes or anyone to watch do it, you have to get up and act it out yourself. There are all kinds of jokes coming out of Pixar when they were doing the Green Army Men. All these animators were jumping off their desk, climbing up and jumping off again until they got exactly right. And some of you might have seen the footage of when they were trying to get the base plate. One of the lead people there nailed an old pair of sneakers to a board, and they tried walking around with their feet nailed to a board. Act it out. That's part of the practice. Analyzing motion and turning it to your own purposes is one of your primary skills. Open your eyes, watch people on the street, watch how you move, watch how your friends move, watch how everybody moves, and see if maybe you can reproduce it later. Pull out the essence of that motion and see if you can reproduce just the basics. You don't want to turn into a human mocap device because that just looks dead. It's always been dead. Rotoscoping, mocap, whatever, it looks dead. But if you can get the essence and caricature it and exaggerate it and apply that sense of timing, that's the real heart of character animation.
I'm not sure exactly what you meant by follow-through. Is that preparing for the next?
No, follow-through is you can't come to a stop just like this unless you actually impact something, and even then you'll have some follow-through. The object will squat. If I hit like this, even if it's a brick wall that doesn't move, I'm going to squash some. That's the follow-through. If I'm just coming to a stop, I'm going to go a little bit past the stopping point and come back to it. Going past it is the follow-through and then coming back. It's the exact counterpart to anticipation. If my hand's moving, I'm going to anticipate, snap, follow through, and come back to rest position. You never just go from point A to point B. You go back from A and you overlap towards point C and you come back to B before you stop. If you don't have that, it's going to look mechanical. It's going to look like a computer did it. Adding the anticipation, ease in, a moderate amount of ease in, not too much ease in. Snap is the most important thing. That's the number one thing I've heard professional animators who look at demo reels complain about. They get demo reel after demo reel that has no snap whatsoever. It all looks like it's going on underwater. They'll just eject it and throw it in the trash. If you can show snap, you're going to get an interview. There are few enough. I've heard animators say that less than 1% of the demo reels they receive, that is, someone who has spent enough time to put several minutes of animation onto a videotape and all those production issues, okay, and has bothered to send in the videotape and gotten it to the right person and got it in their hands. Less than 1% bothered to show snap. Competition isn't too stiff out there, people. If you can apply snap to your animations, you're well on your way to a job.
Your reel is based on Lightwave experience. It's not going to limit you if you apply something for everybody with some snap or edit.
Not if you're applying to foundation imaging or digital domain, or I know there's a certain animator at Disney VR Lab who doesn't turn up his nose at Lightwave. Most professional character animators have something at home. They may be working on Alias Soft Image, who knows what, at work. They're probably working on proprietary things at most shops. But at home, they've got their own private projects. Animators animate, no matter what they're doing. Most of them, they do it for fun as well as work. And at home, they're working on desktop machines just like you and me. A lot of them are using Lightwave. A lot of them are using Martin Hash's 3D Animation or Animation Master. A lot of them will shell out for a soft image seat, but they're using desktop machines too. It's not going to limit you. One thing I would say in putting together a demo reel, and there's a lot of advice in my book about putting together a demo reel, don't put on your demo reel or the insert or anything what software you use. If you've produced broadcast quality work and you've got all the actions right and all that, they can call you in for an interview and then they can ask you what software you're using. But don't volunteer it. Just because there are some shops out there where the HR person who filters these things has a mindset, and if they see 3ds Max or Lightwave or whatever their pet peeve is, goes in the trash immediately. Do not filter yourself out over inconsequential stuff. If you can do character animation that's acceptable quality in Lightwave, you can do it in any package. So don't cut yourself off short. Oh, before I forget and before I get thrown out of here, okay, #1 resource. Write down this URL. 700 people in the industry, wannabes like yourself and top lead animators from the major studios. There's at least one person from every character animation studio in the world subscribing to this list. I'm very active on it, so are a lot of the other people in the industry. Ask a question, any question pertinent to character animation. You're going to get people from Pixar answering your questions. You know, sometimes they can't talk about things under NDAs, but they're very, very helpful. This is not a closed industry. Most of these lead animators are desperate to have trainees come in, so they want you to do well. Morph Gizmo, how many people saw the demo earlier today? Great. That's the most I've seen of it, too. Lip Sync with Magpie, #2 issue of Lightwave and the free one that everyone picked up. Page 30, I do a tutorial on using Magpie to automatically export lip sync scripts. Use them with morph targets, image sequences, whatever in Lightwave. Read the article, that'll cover just about what I was doing here. This is my personal contact information. I generally answer email within 2 days. Do not send me binary attachments without my okay first. I will not only not answer you, but I'll hand you off to my friends, the hackers. And that's about everything I was able to cover. Any other last questions? Okay, thank you everybody for sticking around. Stay seated. We're going to have a drawing now for door prizes. Anybody who doesn't have one, you might get one.